What's going on, everybody? Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Kieran, and I have a haircut that makes me look like a lesbian. So, today I wanted to talk about marijuana. Now, I've done a couple of these videos on my channel about marijuana, weed. Nobody calls it Mary Jane anymore, I don't think anyway. But each of them has a varying degree to do with how it affects your spiritual health, okay? Maybe there's been other focuses on exactly what it does for you, what it doesn't do. But today in this video, I want to talk about how it does affect your spiritual health, how in a direct way it affects your spirituality, okay? So I'm going to be the first to admit that I like weed. I like it. I like smoking. I like the aesthetic of smoking something. Okay, now it's not the only way to ingest THC, which is the chemical that gives you that high feeling. Okay, you can obviously take an edible or drink it these days. The technology is amazing, but regardless, I will be the first to admit that I like it. I like the aesthetic, like I mentioned, and I like the feeling, I guess, because you're not sober anymore, which is sometimes pretty fun, because being sober can be hard. Life can be hard. So sometimes there's reasons why you get high. Sometimes it's just to have fun. Sometimes you're hanging out. Sometimes you have deep conversations. Sometimes you expand your mind, right? So there's no real inherent negativity towards liking something that is relatively harmless. And relatively, I'm going to go ahead and really put that in loose terms. But for the sake of this video, relatively harmless. However, there are elements towards marijuana that do affect your growth. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about your spiritual health. And what I would sort of define spirituality is a relationship with your highest or deepest self, right? So to me, your spirituality is the ability to grow, your ability to move past what you once were, and to constantly open yourself up, and to constantly grow and learn and become, I don't want to say a better version of yourself, but a more open, more authentic maybe, a truer, more objective representation of what you stand for, right? So you start on a journey and maybe you have fears about particular things or doing particular things, and suddenly, a couple of years in, you don't have those fears anymore, right? So you can track the trajectory of your growth, right? And your spirituality, your spiritual health, your spiritual growth can be seen then, based upon the actions that you've taken, the conditioning that has been undone, and how much you're still going, how much you still believe in, how much you feel, right? So you can see very clearly upon your life where the growth has occurred and where it has yet to occur. And spirituality, the spiritual sort of adds this different perspective, what allows you to give meaning, deeper meaning to things that otherwise seem random, right? So there's an ability that people have that they can do that. It's intuitive, it's wise. I could even say that it's intelligent. But oftentimes, a lot of spiritual people will do things that they believe they have to do, or they believe they should do, or they believe that they should experience. And it doesn't just apply to marijuana, it applies to all sorts of spiritual drugs or mushrooms or anything like that. Essentially what we're talking about here is distractions. We're talking about things that take us away from just being sober. And another way of saying that is things that take us away from being present with our emotions or present with our current experiences, right? So there's nothing intrinsically wrong with getting high. I would say, honestly, almost all drugs are fair game in the morality clause. But what happens, though, is that with marijuana in particular, what it starts to do over time is affect your emotions. It affects your mood, it affects your physical health, and it affects your brain chemistry, right? So focusing in on the most basic of this is it affects your physical health. Obviously, smoking anything is not going to be good for your lungs over time. You start to get out of shape, you start craving more foods, usually junky kind of sweet tasting foods, so you start eating a little bit more unhealthy than you normally would. You become lazy, you start losing your sleep, right? You stop having dreams, And if you're into recording dreams, or you believe dreams give you messages either from a different dimension or your own subconscious, then you lose an access to that. So you start to feel more lethargic and heavy. Physically, just generally speaking, you start to feel more lethargic and heavy. When it comes to your brain chemistry, while it is not a physically addicting drug like, say, cocaine or heroin may be, it does still form a conditioned response. So it still forms a mental addiction, which is you're using it as a crutch, so you believe that this will help you get over a particular thing or a particular feeling. And what happens is it's just hitting dopamine centers over and over and over and over again, which is the same that any addiction, or things that we don't even consider addictions, like checking our phone as soon as we wake up, or how much time we spend on social media, right? So lots of different things we don't think of as addictions per what a normal drug we would think. We think of a drug, we often think of cocaine or something like that, but it forms an addiction, right? So your brain, it becomes wired to using this substance, even if it is not physically addictive, right? So then there's your emotions, and this is where it gets into the really spiritually heavy stuff. Is now we're talking about an inability to process uncomfortable feelings. And that is the basis of spirituality, is the ability to do that. The ability to face yourself coherently and sober with no distractions and experience it as it's meant to be experienced. Otherwise, everything else is a distraction. I'm not saying you can do that every time, or that every time that's even the best option, but when it comes to our own personal responsibility for our own sense of spirituality, we have to be able to sit down and feel what we're feeling. We have to be able to take a higher look at what's going on within us. Not necessarily judge it, not necessarily think about it, but just feel it, and not be swept away by those emotions, but allow ourselves to almost sort of detract or deject from what's going on, have a more objective viewpoint of things, as if a bird was watching our experience, as if we were a character in a movie, rather than the person it's happening to. But marijuana hijacks your emotions, it hijacks your feelings, and it blocks them off. There becomes a disconnect within you. So for the people who are spiritual, who consider themselves spiritual, often there's a trait of wanting to grow or wanting to experience something better or different or more abundant or beautiful, and there's a lot of wanting a dream life and this and that and that, and marijuana fundamentally gets in the way of those things. So this is not a video to say don't ever smoke, don't ever drink, don't ever partake in anything that you truly enjoy. That's of course not the point of this video, but when it comes to using something on a daily basis or on a continual basis, and directing it back to your spiritual health, marijuana is one of those tricky drugs, because it lulls you into a false sense of security. It makes you think, well, this isn't a hard drug, this isn't that bad, it can't possibly have any effects. And you do it once or twice because you're having a good time and it's fine, but then inevitably what happens is life gets difficult, life gets hard, you start to change or grow, and old feelings come up, or feelings that are being triggered are of course coming up for you depending on the circumstance, and you turn to this crutch or you turn to this drug and you keep using it. Eventually what happens is you stagnate. You're not able to grow anymore, and so it becomes contradictory to your actual growth, your actual spiritual health. And it's ironic, or it's kind of funny, because marijuana was one of those things that really helped me open up towards spirituality. It was at one point really the only thing I could do to get over a lot of the things I was experiencing, to maybe ease some of the anxiety, and to just make me feel a little bit different in general. But that wore off pretty quickly, right? There was always this sort of rosy red glasses that you view it with, like the what do they call it when a relationship, when it begins, like a newlywed sort of thing. There's this beautiful type of energy at the beginning, but then eventually you keep using something, it just becomes another problem. So not only is this video just an insight into doing something daily and forming attachments or addictions to it, but also it's an insight into how something that you like can also really hurt you. And that just because you like something, it's not necessarily the best thing for you. So weed is one of those tricky things where in balanced moderation, it may be helpful towards you, but as far as keeping it in your life, as well as trying to keep your goals with spirituality, the two ideas do not mix. I've personally never met anybody who was spiritually awakened who has never outgrown it or has never shared the same opinion as me. Usually The people who differ from this opinion are people who are not that concerned with growing. We're not that concerned with growth. In the same vein, they might have a fine life and they're able to manage themselves well, but for the vast majority of people, it seems, for the vast majority of the people who consider themselves spiritual, who are going through something, it seems that it only stagnates you after a certain amount of time. There's nothing unspiritual about it. There's nothing wrong with it. Again, it is just the thing that contradicts the spirituality about you. And again, anybody can do this with anything. Ayahuasca, mushrooms, DMT, Bufo combo, all of these things I've seen people use as distractions, whether or not they were under the guise of spirituality, all to simply get to a place where they were healed or they were better, right? And there's that mindset that if you take this experience and add some shortcut, you can sort of navigate to this better place somewhere over there in the future. And that just is not the case. Like 99% of the time, that just doesn't happen. It's why people who go backpacking throughout Europe don't really find themselves. They just realize that they could have done this at home. So maybe that's a little bit of growth and wisdom, but the value of weed loses itself over time. So eventually it stops becoming the spiritual insight that it might have at the beginning and starts becoming the emotional hijacker that doesn't allow you to just process all the uncomfortable stuff that you need to process just to move forward.